As I mentioned, we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 to 18, and also verses 31 and 32. Before we read these words together, let's again come to God in prayer. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Teach us, Lord, to count our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, so that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. This we ask through Christ our Lord. And all God's people said, Amen. So Exodus 16, starting at verse 1, we're told how the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. And that's just continuing at verse 31. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so that they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the desert when I brought you out of Egypt." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Brothers and sisters, people of God, I had it back in my former life as a high school teacher that I went into it kind of already knowing that there would be some things where no matter what I did, no matter how I tried to present it, that the students were just bound to complain. I just knew that going in, that you'd have days where they'd be going, "What? Notes? You're making us take notes? We've done that once this year already. What? You're making us do homework? And you expect us to do it at home? What is this?" The best was, "What? There's a test today? Since when?" "Since we reviewed yesterday." And I announced it a week before. So I was kind of prepared for that stuff. The thing that really caught me off guard, especially in the school I was teaching in, my students would even complain when I brought in videos to show them. And that baffled me, because back when I was still in high school, if we saw the teacher wheeling in one of those big carts with the TV on top, we went, oh boy. And it didn't matter what the teacher was going to show. It could be a video of the highlights of the Crimean War. It could be a riveting presentation of the effects you get when you crossbreed different varieties of fruit flies. We had that. We didn't care. It was a video. We didn't have to take notes. We didn't actually have to think very hard. But the students I taught would actually complain about, like, the TV's here, we're going to have to watch a video. Do we have to? Really? One of the things I learned from that experience, it is amazing what people will find to complain about. And I came to appreciate how complaining that way is kind of like a never-ending natural resource. The problem is we just haven't found a way to harness it yet. It could solve all our energy problems. I also realized too, I pointed this out in a Bible study not so long ago, that you realize too in life, there are some people who only seem to be happy when they are miserable. There are just some people out there who are only happy when they've found something to grumble and gripe about. And you kind of see that then too in the stories you get about the Israelites during their time out in the wilderness. If you read the book of Exodus right from the very beginning, you realize there is a whole lot of complaining in this story. The book of Exodus basically begins with the people of Israel, the people of God, crying out to God. Though they do have legitimate reason, they are being treated as slaves in Egypt. They are actually suffering. But the thing is, when God does then send Moses and Aaron to get them out of Egypt, they then begin complaining about it. Look what you've done. You've gone to Pharaoh, you've got him mad, and now he's going to take it out on us. Thanks a lot, Moses and Aaron. And then once the Israelites finally do leave Egypt, they continue to complain. They get to the Red Sea. Moses, you noticed all the water between us and where we want to go? How are we supposed to get across that? And then they come to Mara, where there's water, but they taste it and right away go, blech, this water's nasty. What are we supposed to drink now? And now in the story we just read, they get to the desert of Sin and they realize, after being on the road for exactly 1 month, hey, we ate the food we brought from Egypt. Moses, Aaron, now what are we supposed to do? And it says in Exodus 16 verse 2 that the whole community, all the Israelites got together and grumbled against Moses and Aaron. It says that. I would still like to think there must have been at least a few Israelites that looked at what was going on, that realized, hey, hang on a minute there. You guys, you're complaining, just simmer down. Think this through. You're being ridiculous. First of all, it's only been 1 month since we actually left Egypt. And when you think about it, that's a minor miracle in itself. It is amazing that the food we brought with us lasted this long. And when you think it through too, do you think God would have gotten us this far without having some idea of what he was going to do next? He has a plan. And besides, our food is not totally gone. Yes, the bread and that stuff is gone, but we've got our flocks and herds, our sheep and cattle. We're not saying, start butchering it all and have a massive barbecue here out in the desert, but still. Keep some in reserve for later, but it's okay to use some now. I'm going further. The way you are all talking about Moses and Aaron, that's not fair. It's not right. So when you really think it through, it was not Moses and Aaron who brought us up out of Egypt. It was God. From beginning to end, God sent them. But then every time something came up, every time it looked like we were never going to get out of Egypt, God brought us through. When Pharaoh kept saying, no, you can't leave, God sent the plagues. And when Pharaoh did try coming after us and tried forcing us to go back, God opened a way through the sea. And even just a couple of days ago at Mara, when the water was just so nasty, God made it good. One other thing, the way you guys are going on about how good it was, how good we had it back in Egypt. Honestly, what part of Egypt were you guys in? The truth is, we were slaves there. And what's worse, the Egyptians made it very clear they did not want us around. They were afraid of us. They were deliberately trying to work us to death. And when that wasn't working, remember how they deliberately started taking our baby boys. They started murdering our sons. Remember that? All this food you're talking about, those pots of meat you remembered, it wasn't like that. The Egyptians, they weren't at all interested in keeping us alive. But God is the one who has given us life. He's given us new life. Like I said, I'd like to think there were at least a few in the Israelite community that recognize that's really what they should have been thinking. And that way it's easy for us too to look back at what the Israelites were doing in the wilderness. It's easy for us to look at them and think the same thing. Come on, you guys. How can you be so forgetful? How can you be so ungrateful? How can you be, for lack of a more polite term, how can you be so stupid? And in a way, for us to be able to see it, that is a good thing. It's good for us to be able to recognize the attitude problem Israel had. But the thing about what happened to Israel out in the wilderness, it also illustrates how easy it is for folks to find things to complain about. It shows how quickly grumbling can spread. It is almost like a toxin, a virus. And there's another dimension to it as well that another pastor pointed out. He used the illustration when, I should have brought a coffee cup with me, but when you got a cup full of coffee and somebody bumps you and it spills, what's going to come out of that cup? Coffee. When your heart, your life is full of discontent and bitterness and someone or something in life bumps you, what's going to spill out? What spills out is a reflection of what you filled yourself with. I think the more you look at the world around you, the more you realize how true that is. You look at the society around us, especially after what we've been through with the pandemic, the impact of the war in Ukraine after a year. You see all the economic and political issues that have come up because of those things. Especially now, there seems no end of things for people to grumble and complain about. But then you look at the church, at where the church is at as well. There is a lot of concern in a lot of churches too. There are a lot of churches out there with a lot to be anxious about. Like the Israelites, a lot of us as God's people, we're living with this sense of being out in the wilderness. We're out in unfamiliar and unknown territory. The world has changed so much in just the past few decades, and the church no longer occupies the same esteemed place in society it once held. And doing church is no longer easy. It's not just a matter of you go out, you put up a sign, church service, 10 a.m., Sunday morning, be there, minister says you gotta. And then boom, church was full. You had enough names for all your office bearers and everyone else you needed for your programs. Collection happened, and oh, look, there's probably enough to cover all the expenses. It's not like that anymore. Things are much more uncertain. Things are much more unknown. And because of that, it's easy to start feeling anxious. It's easy to start giving way to grumbling. But the other thing I think we need to be aware of too, that when you have someone who tries to do something about this, when you have someone who tries to do something different, something new as a church, we don't always make it easy for them, do we? I'm not saying then whenever someone has a new idea for a new program or new ministry that we should just go along and not ask questions. it is good when we take time to talk it through, when we ask things, okay, so you've got this idea, where does it fit in our budget overall? Where are the people going to come from to do this? But you think about it, those are legitimate questions. They're constructive, they're helpful. It's new ideas, new ministries, they often need money, they need people, they need polishing for them to see if they're actually going to work and bear fruit. You got to do some prep. But the thing is, so often, instead of asking those kinds of good, helpful, constructive questions, it instead goes the other way. It turns into grumbling, complaining. And it gets to the point sometimes where folks almost feel then they're unwelcome, they're unwanted, even maybe they feel unsafe, even suggesting anything. When you come up with something new, especially if you're new yourself, you don't know the ropes, you don't know the culture in the church. You hope for the best, you have good intentions. But when you come up with something new and instead the answer is, well, we've never done that before. We've never done it that way before. And besides, you did not obviously check with the right people. You did not go through the right channels. What makes you think you can come here and change things? You think about how counterproductive that kind of attitude is, especially for as much as we say we want to see growth, new people. Well, think about it. The new people won't know how we did things before. And so either we have to be patient and explain, or not get too worked up about it when they don't necessarily do things the way we're used to. It'll be okay. Getting back to the Israelites out in the wilderness, the basic problem with all the folks there who've started grumbling, who've started complaining, they got excellent rearview mirrors. They're looking back at Egypt. They're looking back at the past with these rose-colored glasses on. What they are missing, though, is the bigger picture. They're missing the fact they could not stay there. Egypt maybe was familiar, but it wasn't safe either. And if Israel had stayed, then they would never get anywhere else. There'd be no way then that they would ever have gotten to the promised land. There would be no way they would get to where God wanted them to be, not if they had stayed where they were. But then there's the thing, you look at how God himself responds when his own people start grumbling and complaining against him. You'd almost expect, and he will later on as you keep going, you'd expect God at this point to unleash his righteous anger. You dare grumble against me? Let the smiting begin. But instead, God responds to his grumbling people with understanding, with patience, compassion. He knows this is a time of upheaval, a time of uncertainty for them. Yes, the Israelites, they did see something of what God can do back in Egypt. But these are folks still figuring things out. They're still figuring out, what does this mean for us to be and live as God's people? There's a lot they're working through. And so God does not do anything that might then dial up the anxiety. And the fact is, too, he recognizes the need is real. And so that's what God focuses on. The Israelites need food. So God sets a table for them in the wilderness. He sends quail, he provides meat. He also gives them bread from heaven. But then God also goes on to address some of the bigger issues, the elephants in the camp, so to speak. His own people, they don't know him yet, not the way they should. His own people still don't trust God completely. But they need to learn this. They need to learn to trust him. They need to be able to trust and obey. And so God sends bread. But you notice he also says, this is going to be a test for you. This is going to be a learning experience. The Israelites are told, you'll need to go out every day. You're going to need to gather bread, but just enough for that day. You're going to need to trust that that bread will be there again the next morning, and the day after, and the day after that. And so this bread from heaven, this manna, it really is part of a learning experience. It's part of a teachable moment. Will you trust God? Will you do things God's way? God also ties us to another big question, the question of rest. He connects this manna from heaven to the gift of Sabbath. You think about it. The Israelites, they'd been serving for slaves as slaves for centuries, and now they're basically told, you now get 1 day off out of 7. 1 day out of 7, you don't need to work. And that means you don't need to worry. You don't have to worry all the time. Why? Because God says, I am going to take care of you. I will have it covered. You don't have to worry, because I will make sure it's enough. And I think that gets us back to where we are, to where we as a church are at. Like a lot of churches out there, we do have our share of things to be concerned about. We have got some things to figure out. We've got a building that does need some attention. Recognize a lot of our volunteers are wearing multiple hats. And as you've seen from the email that was sent this week, it's in the bulletin too, there is going to be some changeover in council. Not what we expected, really. So yeah, we've got some things to figure out. It makes a huge difference. What do we do with all that? Because yeah, we could give in to anxiety, we could give in to fear, we could complain. That is an option. But there's another option. We could also strive to get to a place where we can say, yeah, we have a lot of things to figure out. We realize that. We're aware. We can't ignore all of this. This needs attention. But we also trust that God does have a plan for us. He's got this. Can we get to that place where we're aware of what we need, but we also know God is there and He is enough? Especially when you consider, you think about the biggest thing of all, the biggest need that we have, the fact that we were sinners, the fact we had once been under the power of sin and death, we were enslaved, but God took care of that. He sent His own Son, and on the cross, He paid the price. By rising again, He set us free. He gave us new life. It's not by accident that on one occasion, Jesus calls Himself the bread that comes down from heaven. He is the bread that comes down from heaven because like that manna, He's always there, and He's always enough. And realizing that should change, that should shape the way we then live out our lives. There is this one story I came across this past week about St. Francis of Assisi, not the current Pope, but the Pope's namesake. St. Francis apparently was visiting a monastery somewhere, and one of the monks suddenly came in a hurry and reported, Francis, what do we do, Francis? Someone came and stole all the bread. We got nothing. So Francis decided to go after the thieves. But then once he caught up with them, he talked with them, and he pointed out he brought bread and also wine with him. And he proceeded to invite them to sit and eat, because obviously if you came for bread, you must be hungry, you must be thirsty. So sit, enjoy, and then once we're done, come back with me, because where I'm going, we have more. You can imagine just how confused those thieves must have been. But they were won over. They ended up going back with Francis, and what's more, ended up becoming Christians, becoming monks, friars themselves. And that story, it struck me, like I said, I realized Francis could have done a number of other things too. He could have started lamenting. He could have started going, see, the whole world's against us. It's against the church. He could have started grumbling. Oh, man, this is not in the budget. Where are we going to get more bread? He could have started pointing fingers and assigning blame. Which one of you two were supposed to be, or you guys were supposed to be watching the stuff? You let somebody in and walk off with their stuff. Thanks. Could have done any one of those things. But instead, he didn't just remain calm. Instead, Francis displayed this sense of peace that is born of trust and faith. And that is something I think we can learn from his example many centuries ago. Like Francis did, yes, we need to see the needs. We need to see the needs. But what's more, we need to see God. What we really need is to know God is there and He is enough. Let's pray. Loving God, our Father in heaven, as much as we can look at those Israelites, what they did out in the wilderness, how they behaved. And as much as we can see how silly, how foolish they were, we know we're not actually much different from them. In many ways, we are also out in the middle of a wilderness of unknown territory. And it can be easy for us to look at the past, at the things we have left behind, and then see all that through rose-colored glasses. It can be easy for us to give way to our anxiety, to our fear, and to start grumbling and complaining. But the truth is that we cannot stay where we were. We can't stay where we were, not if we are going to get where you intend us to be. And even when the way does seem uncertain, even unsafe, we can trust that you are there, Father. You are watching over us. And you are enough. And all God's people said, Amen.